You know that feeling when the world gets too quiet and something just feels off? Like you're in a grocery store late at night and some stranger won't stop staring, or worse, follows your home. Or maybe you're alone in your apartment and there's a knock at the door, a man asking for help, but something about him feels wrong. Or imagine being asleep with your family and suddenly you hear someone trying to get into your backyard. These aren't just stories, they're the moments that make you question, what would you do if danger came knocking? Well, let's dive into these chilling stories and see how they unfold. I'm a stay-at-home mom of 3, so naturally, grocery shopping is a frequent task in my life. My husband works in tech, and with kids aged 10, 7, and 3, the food bill is always high. Most of the time, I shop at a nearby King Kulin, though occasionally I stop by Target. This incident happened when I was 39, just under a year ago. One evening, I was running behind schedule and ended up heading to the store around 9:30 p.m., knowing they closed at 10. Since my husband was home with the kids, I had the rare chance to shop alone. The store was almost empty, which felt peaceful at first. As I hurried through the aisles with my coupons, I was in the cereal aisle when someone tapped my shoulder. Startled, I turned to see a man about my height, with a baseball cap, a black t-shirt, and a red hoodie. He smiled awkwardly and apologized for scaring me, saying he was looking for a bag of chips that happened to be in my cart. Though I found it strange, I politely told him where I'd grabbed them. He claimed he couldn't find them, so I led him to the exact spot. He thanked me, but his bad breath was overwhelming. As I turned to leave, he started chatting about how much he liked the chips because of the ingredients. I tried to make it clear I needed to get back to my cart, but he didn't take the hint. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You're really pretty." Uncomfortable, I thanked him curtly and said I needed to finish shopping. He followed me to my cart and kept talking until I told him, as politely as possible, that I'd like to shop in peace. Finally, he backed off, but I noticed him lurking around the aisles, watching me. When I checked out, he got in line behind me with just a couple of items. I felt his eyes on me the whole time. After I paid and loaded my car, I noticed him in the parking lot, sitting in an old beat-up Honda. He didn't turn the car on, he just watched me. Once I was driving home, I glanced in my rearview mirror and felt relieved that no headlights followed me. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw a car creeping down the street with its lights off. It was the same Honda. I rushed inside and called for my husband, who ran out to the front yard. By then, the car had sped off. The scariest part happened days later, late at night. While we were all asleep, we heard someone outside trying to open the gate to our backyard. My husband slid the window open, startling the intruder, who bolted. Grabbing a baseball bat, my husband chased him and saw the same Honda screeching away down the street. We called the police and described the man and his car. Thankfully, he never came back, likely scared off by my furious husband chasing after him with a bat. But even now, I can't shake the uneasy feeling that he knows where we live. When I was in college, I worked at a 24-hour Walgreens. Naturally, that meant a few unlucky people had to work the night shift. Since I was 20 and in college, I figured my boss would never put me on the overnight shift. But I guess she saw my school schedule and thought I was perfect for it, especially since I had Mondays and Wednesdays off. One day, I saw that I was scheduled for a Tuesday night shift, from midnight to 8 a.m. I checked the schedule multiple times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. I felt sick, but when I asked my supervisor, he told me if I was over 18, It wasn't up to me. I considered quitting, but I needed the job. So I sucked it up, telling myself it was just this one time, and I'd never do it again. I arrived at the store at midnight and relieved my coworker, Amanda. Half the lights were out to save energy, but surprisingly, there were still a lot of customers at that hour. After 1 a.m. though, things quieted down. By 2 a.m., there were barely any customers left, and I was bored out of my mind. I started wondering if there were any other employees around. It didn't make sense that a 20-year-old would be left to run the place alone. Then, I saw a bald man who looked like he could be a manager. He kept walking past the front registers every few minutes with a keyring and a small backpack. I approached him and asked, "Are you the manager?" He came over and asked if it was my first day. I told him it was my first night shift. He introduced himself as the night manager, but when I mentioned the man at the front, he looked confused. "Who?" he asked. I described him, and he asked me to show him who I was talking about. As we walked out of the back warehouse, all the lights in the store suddenly went out. The night manager told me to wait while he checked things out. I sat on a box, trying to reach out to my friends, when I suddenly heard a door from the warehouse opening. I froze as I heard slow footsteps approaching, followed by a voice. "Hey kid, you in here?" It wasn't the night manager's voice. It was the bald guy's voice. Panic set in as I quickly rushed out of the warehouse and into the store, but I couldn't find Rob anywhere. I called his name, but there was no response. I grabbed my jacket and tried to open the exit door, but it was locked. Suddenly, Rob appeared, whispering frantically to hurry up and get outside. He followed me as we exited the store, and he immediately called the police, telling them he believed an armed man had locked himself inside to rob the place. I stayed in my car, watching as several police cars arrived. They went inside the store, and I didn't stay to see what happened next. The next day, I learned from my supervisor that the security footage had captured the bald man acting suspiciously, circling the store and checking if the coast was clear before locking the doors. The cameras showed him heading straight for the warehouse, where he had sent me. That's what really scared me. The thought that if he had been armed, he could have been planning to harm me. The man was never identified, but after that night, I swore off overnight shifts for good. It was the summer of 2015, and I had just turned 25. I was living in a small, one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. My work schedule was erratic. I was a nurse at the time, and my shifts often alternated between days and nights. One evening, I was home alone, enjoying a rare night off. My apartment was on the second floor of a 3-story building. It was a cozy place, and I liked the peace and quiet. That night, I was curled up on my couch, watching a movie, when I heard a soft knock at my door. It wasn't loud, just barely audible, but enough to grab my attention. It was odd. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I rarely got visitors. My friends knew to call or text before dropping by, so this felt unusual. I paused the movie and approached the door cautiously. I didn't have a peephole, but there was a small window next to the door with sheer curtains. Peeking through, I saw a man standing outside. He looked to be in his early 40s, unshaven, with a weathered face and wearing a dirty gray hoodie and jeans. He wasn't someone I recognized. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice firm but not aggressive. The man hesitated, then said, Sorry to bother you, miss. My car broke down, and my phone's dead. Can I use your phone to call a tow truck?" Red flags went up immediately. The parking lot outside was well lit, and I could clearly see it from my window. There was no car in sight. "I'm sorry, I can't help you," I said through the door, trying to sound polite but firm. He didn't leave. Instead, he shuffled closer to the door. "Please, it'll just take a second," he insisted, his voice shaky. "I'm not dangerous, I promise." That last sentence sent a chill down my spine. Why would someone feel the need to say that? "No, I'm sorry. You need to leave," I said again, louder this time. There was silence for a moment. Then I saw the shadow of his hand reach up, trying to turn the doorknob. Panic surged through me. I ran to grab my phone, dialing 911 as quickly as I could. I kept my voice steady as I explained the situation to the operator. While I was on the phone, the man began knocking louder, almost pounding on the door. "Please, I just need to make a call," he shouted, his tone shifting from pleading to demanding. I told the operator that he was trying to get in. She assured me that officers were on their way and told me to stay on the line. Suddenly, the pounding stopped. I peeked out the window again, and the man was gone. My heart was racing as I scanned the parking lot and the street beyond, but there was no sign of him. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They searched the area, but didn't find anyone matching his description. I gave them all the details I could, and they promised to patrol the neighborhood for the next few nights. For weeks, I was on edge. I bought a deadbolt and a security bar for the door, and started keeping a baseball bat by my bed. A few months later, I heard through a neighbor that a man fitting the same description had been arrested for attempting to break into another apartment a few blocks away. To this day, I wonder what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts.
I'll never forget the eerie night when I took a late delivery just as my shift was ending. The pizza place was closing, and I was looking forward to heading home. But the phone rang. I was the only one working the counter, so I answered it. At first, there was only silence on the line. I hung up, but the phone rang again a minute later. This time, I heard the faint, cold voice of an elderly woman. She ordered a regular pizza for delivery. I was frustrated but stayed polite. I didn't want to make the delivery, but my boss insisted, so I reluctantly agreed. The address was 7 miles away, in a quiet neighborhood. When I arrived, the house was small and dark, with no lights on. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed someone standing by the window. It was an old woman, staring at me blankly. I called out, saying I had her pizza. Her expression didn't change. Then, suddenly, a wide, unsettling smile crept across her face, a smile so unnatural, it sent chills down my spine. Terrified, I placed the pizza on the doorstep and returned to my car. As I started the car, I glanced to my right. She was standing right outside my passenger window, still smiling that disturbing smile. I floored it and sped away without looking back. My boss never sent me on late-night deliveries again. The man in the patio. It was a late evening delivery to a remote lake house, far from the main town. The house looked old and abandoned, surrounded by tall grass and dense woods. When I knocked on the door, I heard footsteps approaching, but no one answered. Instead, a deep, gruff voice told me to bring the pizza to the backyard. Something felt off, but I didn't want trouble with my boss for not completing the delivery. Reluctantly, I walked around the house to the backyard. There was a patio with a table and 4 chairs. One chair was occupied. Someone was sitting there, facing away from me. I called out, "Excuse me," but the figure didn't move. As I stepped closer, I suddenly heard a voice behind me, saying, "Over here, I want to show you something." I turned to see a man peeking around the corner of the house, his face twisted in a sinister grin. Panic took over, and I bolted back to my car without even looking at the person in the chair. Later, I called the police. They told me the house had been abandoned for years, with no signs of anyone living there. I quit the job shortly after that, haunted by what could have happened if I had stayed. The stranger in the back seat. This happened during a late-night delivery in a rural area. The road was foggy and surrounded by dense woods. Suddenly, a man jumped out in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. I hit him. Panicked, I got out to check on him. He was lying still by my car tire, wearing a black hoodie. Then, from the woods, I heard a scream for help. Unsure of what to do, I decided to investigate the scream. I wandered into the woods, calling out, but it was eerily silent. Then, I noticed a shadowy figure hiding behind a tree, watching me. My instincts kicked in, and I sprinted back to my car. When I got there, the man I had hit was gone. Shaken, I continued the delivery. When I arrived, the woman who opened the door casually asked, "Do you guys have delivery partners now?" Confused, I turned to see someone sitting in my back seat. Terrified, I used the woman's phone to call the police. By the time they arrived, the person in my car had vanished, but they found a blood-stained knife on the floor. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't noticed him. It was New Year's Eve, 2017, and I was heading back home to Ohio, just outside Cleveland, after wrapping up a semester at the University of Rochester. My holidays had been anything but festive. I'd stayed on campus an extra week after the term ended due to some personal matters, which meant spending Christmas pretty much alone. By the time my flight took off, my mood was already sour. Adding insult to injury, I'm a die-hard Cleveland Browns fan. That year, we made NFL history in the worst possible way, finishing the season 0-16. Watching that last game from the airport was a special kind of misery. To top it off, my flight got delayed, completely derailing my family's New Year's plans. Instead of driving to my cousin's party together, my parents had to leave early, taking our main car. I was left to drive the spare car by myself. At least my mom tried to soften the blow by leaving Vera, our golden retriever, behind to keep me company. By the time my Uber dropped me off at home, it was almost 10 p.m. I didn't bother unpacking. I tossed my bags into the spare car, leashed Vera, locked up the house, and set off into the frigid Ohio night. The drive was uneventful at first, just the usual winding back roads cutting through empty fields and patches of forest. There was only a light dusting of snow, thankfully, and the pitch darkness was broken only by my headlights and the occasional farmhouse porch light in the distance. Halfway through the trip, Vera started whining. At first, I thought she just wanted attention, but then she started pacing anxiously in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed a bathroom break. Sighing, I pulled it to a small clearing just big enough for the car. The cold hit me as soon as I stepped out, but Vera didn't seem to mind. I let her off leash to do her business near the edge of the woods. That's when I heard it, a loud crashing sound deep in the forest. It wasn't a simple branch snapping. It sounded heavy, deliberate, like something large moving through the trees. My heart skipped a beat. Before I could process what was happening, Vera bolted straight into the woods. Panic set in as I called out for her, my voice echoing uselessly into the darkness. She didn't come back. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and ran after her, using the dim flashlight to navigate the snow-covered ground. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the darkness became, and the cold made it hard to breathe. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted her. She was crouched low, tail tucked, trembling like I'd never seen before. Relief washed over me as I pulled her into a hug. But her fear jolted me back to reality. Something was still out there. We started back toward the car, but I wasn't sure if we were going the right way. Then I heard it again, the crashing sound, but this time it was behind us and getting closer. Adrenaline took over as I ran, following Vera as she darted ahead. When we finally reached the car, I threw her inside, slammed the door shut, and jumped into the driver's seat. That's when I saw them, 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching us that I didn't stick around to find out what they wanted. I started the car and floored it, my hands shaking on the wheel. A few miles down the road, I realized Vera was bleeding. Someone or something had cut her. I managed to stop and bandage her wound, using the first aid kit my mom always insisted on keeping in the car. By the time I reached my cousin's house, I was too shaken to talk about what had happened. I didn't even tell my family. To this day, I think about that night, especially around New Year's. It left me with a haunting question. What was out there in the woods, and why were they watching us? But I know this. Something about that man's face still haunts me to this day. It wasn't just the smirk when the trap was sprung. It was the way he looked at us, almost like he knew us. Like he was enjoying something personal, something deeper than a simple robbery. I can't shake the feeling that we were meant to be there that night, that we weren't random victims at all. Since that New Year's Eve, I've avoided going back to the lake, even though Nate and Trevor have suggested it a couple of times. The thought of setting foot on that ice, hearing the crunch of snow under my boots, sends a shiver down my spine that has nothing to do with the cold. I even avoid driving anywhere near that area. But the worst part is the dreams. I keep seeing that same man standing on the trail, staring at us. In my dreams, his face is clearer, too clear, His smirk twists into something unnatural, something that feels more like a predator toying with prey. And then I wake up, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Trevor and Nate seem to have moved on, but I can tell it's changed them too. Trevor doesn't laugh as much as he used to, and Nate has become even more protective, almost paranoid. He double-checks locks, keeps his truck stocked with emergency supplies, and always carries a knife. It's like we all left a piece of ourselves on that lake shore, something we'll never get back. I've tried to make sense of it all, to piece together a reason, but I keep coming up empty. Every now and then, I'll catch myself scrolling through local news stories, hoping for a break in the case or some sign that the people who did this were caught. But nothing ever comes up. It's like they vanished just as quickly as they appeared. I don't know if I'll ever truly understand what happened that night, but I've realized that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Sometimes, the only thing you can do is survive and move forward, even if the shadows of the past follow close behind. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. No matter how peaceful a place may seem, danger can hide in the most unexpected corners, especially in the stillness of a frozen lake, where even the ice can't keep secrets forever. If you're enjoying these terrifying tales, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a creepy story. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Also, let me know in the comments which stories scared you the most, or share your own chilling experiences. I'd love to hear them.
Imagine coming home, the storm outside your window raging, only to hear footsteps inside your house. A lamp crashes. A closet window you haven't touched in months stands wide open, rain spilling in, and then heavy footsteps race toward you from upstairs. Or, picture this, a lone gas station at night, rain pounding the glass. A drenched man appears, his stare empty, his knuckles bloodied. You let him in to escape the storm, but his whispered command, "Don't," freezes you in place. And then there's the flooded road, past midnight, where a car appears from nowhere. Men surround your vehicle, silent and menacing. You race to escape, water surging beneath your tires as shadows close in. 3 storms, 3 strangers, one question: who or what is lurking in the dark? Are you brave enough to find out? They're closer than you think. I arrived home from work about an hour earlier and was settling in for the evening. The storm outside was unusual for our area, and I always felt on edge during these rare thunderstorms. As I sat on my bed watching TV, I heard a noise downstairs. Initially, I dismissed it as the house creaking, but an uneasy feeling urged me to investigate. After a quick check and finding nothing, I filled my water bottle and returned to my room. Barely a few minutes passed before I heard another sound. This time, it was unmistakable, the distinct crash of my living room lamp hitting the floor. The lamp had a notorious tendency to topple when bumped due to its unstable base, but it had never fallen on its own. I hurried downstairs to find it lying on the floor, which felt odd given the relatively mild storm. After setting it upright and scanning the room, I convinced myself it was nothing and went back upstairs. About 45 minutes later, the rain seemed louder, almost unnaturally so, as though it were seeping into the walls. Opening my bedroom door, I realized the sound was coming from downstairs. Following the noise, I ended up at the storage closet near the kitchen. When I opened the door, I found the window inside wide open, rain pouring in and puddling onto the boxes below. I hadn't touched that window in months, and the sight of it open filled me with dread. Shutting it quickly, I froze, overwhelmed by fear. My phone was upstairs, but I wasn't sure if I could safely retrieve it. I decided to grab my car keys and head toward the front door. I moved carefully, praying that if someone was in the house, they wouldn't hear me. I was halfway to the door when I heard heavy footsteps sprinting down the upstairs hallway toward the stairs. Heart pounding, I bolted out the front door, into the rain, and into my car. I backed out of the driveway without looking back and called 911. The police arrived to find an empty house, but further investigation revealed the likely scenario. Someone had broken in through the storage closet window, and the vibrations from their effort had caused the lamp to fall. They had probably hidden upstairs, waiting for me to fall asleep. The thought that someone had been lurking outside my bedroom door that night still sends chills down my spine. I was covering a late-night shift at the gas station, working from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. The storm outside was relentless, with heavy rain and fierce winds. After sitting behind the counter for an hour, I went outside to secure loose items around the pumps. While working, I noticed a man pacing on the sidewalk, drenched and aimless. He didn't approach, so I figured he was waiting for a ride. 2 hours later, as the storm intensified, I retreated to the storage room, away from the shaking windows. That's when I heard loud banging on the front doors. Through the rain-soaked glass, I saw the same man from earlier. Thinking he needed help, I let him in. Without a word of explanation, he paced back and forth, water pooling beneath him. Something about him felt off. His blank stare unnerved me, and I decided to call the police. The moment I reached for the phone, his eyes locked onto mine. "Don't," he said coldly, stopping me in my tracks. His bloody, bruised knuckles sent a chill through me. We stood in tense silence for what felt like an eternity before he turned and walked out into the storm. When the police finally arrived, the man was long gone. The next day, I learned of a missing woman last seen leaving work at 11 p.m., matching the timeline of the encounter. I can't shake the feeling that the man might have been connected, and the incident still haunts me. It was past midnight, and I was driving home after a late shift. The storm was relentless, flooding side streets, but I preferred them to the main roads. As I approached one section, I realized it was too flooded to cross. Frustrated, I put the car in reverse to turn around. When my sensors started beeping, I looked back and saw a car inches from my bumper. It had no headlights and seemed to appear out of nowhere. Confused, I waited for it to move, but it just sat there. Then the driver's door opened, and a man in dark clothing approached my window, knocking, but saying nothing. Feeling uneasy, I tried to inch forward, but he followed me. Suddenly, another knock came from the passenger side. A second man stood there, and behind him, I noticed a third figure approaching. My heart raced as I threw the car into drive, splashing into the flood. For a terrifying moment, my tires lost traction, but I managed to regain control and turn around. Speeding away, I called the police. Later, they found the car abandoned near the flood. It had been stolen months earlier, but the men were gone. To this day, I don't know their intentions, but I often wonder how close I came to disaster that night.